My name's David Webley. Welcome to Conversations with Thought Leaders. It's a season finale of season 2. It's a platform we've created to connect community with inspirational and innovative ideas and people during this year. I'm also the Managing Director of Granite Consulting. Like so many, I'm optimistic that 2021 will be a more positive year for humanity. We're certainly seeing career opportunities emerging and green shoots of recovery. So feel free to get in touch for all things talent related and talent trends across the world. Joined today by Julia. Good morning, Julia.
Morning, David. Great to be here.
And you're joining us from Melbourne as well?
I am.
Very good. So by way of a brief bio on Julia, so she's led change and been changed in her own words. Sometimes by choice, but often by no choice. So after 20 years leading transformations, Julia now speaks, trains, and consults with organisations on turning ideas into outcomes. She's the author of 2 books, Buy-In, Leading Change, Building Commitment and Inspiring People. And then in COVID-19, she set up the Vid-19 conference, which has manifested into a book called Unite, which includes messages of hope and action. Welcome, Julia. How have you been coping in these unprecedented times?
Oh, wow, what a year. I mean, when I started 2020, I think it was the second week, I sat down and I got really organised and planned out the whole year. It's a milestone year for me from a birthday point of view. I had a big year business-wise, and so I mapped out this whole year of things, and I don't think a single one of them actually came to fruition in some way, shape or form. So I think I ripped the plan down at about April or May and kicked it into the bin and started a new one because there's a lot of things I was planning to do this year that just haven't eventuated, and I'm sure that's the same for just about everyone who's listening today. But with all of that uncertainty, though, there's been a lot of, well, in the spirit of the topic, a lot of stuff that has happened. I've got a lot of shit done around the Vid-19 conference, which you mentioned before, which wasn't on the plan in January, but was an amazing event back in March and April this year, and had no plans to do a second book as well. So there's definitely been some action this year despite all the uncertainty. Yeah,
because I know previously you used to do quite a bit of travel, quite a bit of work in the US as well.
Yes, I did. I'm from the UK originally, so I was meant to go back to Europe for a month, and that didn't turn out to be quite the case. I was meant to be in the US and Singapore as well. So got lots of Qantas credits sitting there waiting for me when the world opens again.
Firstly, I know you've just touched on it, but can you share a little bit around your career backstory and how you came to be doing what you are today, please?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. It's a question I get asked a lot. And last week I was actually introduced to a new way of introducing myself. I went to the CEO Summit, which is a big Australian summit here that's women focused. And in that session, we were asked to introduce ourselves with the invisible and the visible. So the visible introduction is what most people would see on LinkedIn and websites, what you touched on before. A long career in business transformation. I've led a lot of the biggest IT and technology transformations in Australia and the UK. My last official role in corporate was the head of the digital transformation program at Telstra, which is the equivalent of BT, I guess, for people back in the UK. And there's a whole life really of being paid to manage uncertainty. Every transformation's got uncertainty in it, so that's professionally what I've been tasked with, and certainly learnt on a lot of those skills this year. Personally, what people don't see, the invisible part of me, is that both of my parents were in the military. I'm one of those people that went to 8 schools.
Okay. Wow.
My childhood I spent in West Germany before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And my teenage years I spent living in the Middle East between what we now know as the Gulf, both of the Gulf Wars.
Yep.
And so there's been a lot of uncertainty and change in my personal life, and it's quite ironic that my surname's Steele, because I often get told Steele by name, Steele by nature, and that pretty much sums me up.
Yeah. And then after that, what was was there any catalyst in particular to start your own business?
Certainly being in corporate and leading a lot of transformations on the receiving end of a lot of consultants that were there to help and give me advice on how I should be leading the change in our organisations. And while that help was important and valid at the time, I started to realise just how much more capability we need as organisations, leaders and teams to change ourselves. I think we're too reliant on getting external help for change. And so I'm a passionate believer of helping train and coach people to change themselves. So I do that at organisation level, team level and individual level as well.
Yeah. And how beneficial do you think writing your first book was in starting your own business? I'm interested really to explore, how you went to position yourself and I suppose get your first customers as much as anything.
And certainly when I left corporate for the first 6 months, I got phone calls about the next transformation. And there was a lot of people that had heard that I'd left Telstra and was keen to get me in to help, share what we'd learned at Telstra and transform their businesses as well. What writing the book gave me was a platform to say, here's something that I believe quite passionate, like I'm passionate about this topic enough to sit and write 50,000 words on it, and to give a perspective that is beyond project management and change management and a lot of the frameworks that exist, and actually it's about how we show up as leaders and us buying in to what we're delivering if we really want to lead change.
Yeah. So if we start to talk a bit about productivity, so can you speak a bit around the impact of and the happenings of 2020 on productivity for us?
Yeah, I think productivity is one of those words that gets a bit of a bad rap. I think from all of my years in projects, as soon as you say the word productivity, what people actually hear is cost saving. And I think there's certainly been an element of that this year as organisations have, let's face it, have had to make quite drastic cuts to stay in business, depending on your industry. But I think if I look at it nationally, productivity is something that Australia has struggled with for a long time. I think our productivity is flatlined, or certainly followed the US and the UK for a long time. Depending on what state in Australia you're in, I think your productivity may have been hit more than others. I know being here in Victoria, the second wave certainly didn't help me be any more productive than I was. Yeah. But talking to individuals, most people have told me that they're working harder than they've ever worked before. I think the question is that productive time or not? I'd be interested to hear from people in the chat about, has that commute time suddenly turned into work time, or, are they less productive because they've had kids at home? I've certainly wrestled with homeschooling this year as well as running my business. So,
do you think there's more of an interesting comment coming through? Do you think there's more of an expectation to work longer hours now then and get more done?
I think there's two answers. I think there's an implied answer and a real answer. Yeah. So I'm a firm believer that the expectation you set as a leader is what people follow. So if you're setting meetings, or if you're online all the time, or you're setting Zoom meetings all the time, then the expectation is that's almost this new behaviour that we've adopted without thinking. I think the second part is, do we actually have the self-discipline to disconnect in the same way that we would leave the office at 5 o'clock? Or have some of those bad behaviours of work-life balance from the office translated to home? There's been times where I've logged off at 6 o'clock, and there's other times where I've been working till 8 or 9 o'clock. It's easier for me. I run my own business. That's my choice. But I'm not sure if everyone has that, feels like they have that choice themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting because for years people have spoke about work-life balance, but this year I would argue that, we've all got our lives and we're sort of fitting work into our lives, and then you've got conflicting priorities. You might have a boss saying, I need you on this meeting, and you don't want to appear to be, rude or not, turn the party line. So it's quite an interesting balancing act I've found, and we've worked hard on it as a business to try and respect that people need some breaks, and whether it's a walk at lunch and just leave your phone, at home or whatever it might be. So I think there's a bit of I don't like to use the word, but I will use it. It's a bit of a reset period.
Yeah, and I think we like to see progress, like in the spirit of, how do we get shit done in uncertainty? How do we take this action? Part of us is used to seeing activity on a floor. So when we walk into an office and we can see people are busy and we can see people are chatting, we get this reassurance as leaders that stuff's happening. When we can't see that because it's in everyone's homes, I feel like some of us are having more meetings to reassure ourselves that things are actually getting done and that our teams understand what's going on as well. So I think there's a confidence and a control piece at play here as well.
I think there's a few comments coming in around collaboration and relationships. So it might just be worth diving into that a bit, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the CEO of Google is quite publicly really counter to a lot of big tech, said actually we believe that collaboration is better done face-to-face in an office environment. And by working remotely, we're trading, trust, equity, and that will run out if we never meet each other again. And I think Jeff put the comment that they've hired 60 new people into a big business in Melbourne,
yep.
Most of whom they haven't met. And we had a bit of a humorous example where we hired a new colleague and we met him, and everyone's right, you're a lot taller than I thought you would be. And a couple of other people have said the same thing to me since. So, I've found moving remote, once you've actually got a human-to-human relationship, is fine, but it can be more challenging when you've never met the person, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you go on the classic, what makes a team? The forming, storming, norming, performing.
Yeah.
How do you form and storm when you're not physically formed? Is the first place I go. But then also that rapport and the things that give us confidence in each other. If you've never had a hard conversation with someone before, it's really hard to have one with someone you've never physically met before. That rapport doesn't exist. That basis of trust that you talked about. And yeah, I think the different responses from different organizations is fascinating. You've got Atlassian and Twitter and others saying that they're never going to ask their people to come back to work, like they've put it in the hands of their people.
Yep.
But I think it will play out, as Google have sort of said, there are some things where we are at our best when we're in a room together. And the task is to figure out, in all of this uncertainty, is where are those moments where we just need to be in the room?
I think there needs to be, I'd say the best bits of the old world and the best bits of this year. And I think for, what I'm hearing is it's probably going to be 50-50 or thereabouts for most businesses. And, having that opt-in policy, because I do think there are some things that are done better in person. And then from relationships, I suppose you get to the subjects of culture. So do you think this year has been detrimental to culture? Because, I always say, culture is like oxygen. It keeps everyone alive in the business.
I think it's very easy to say that culture will be impacted. Yeah. I also think there are a lot of things that have happened this year that when we look back, we will go, holy shit, we were strong enough to get through this year. Like there's a level of resilience and, for us to come out the other side, we will talk about this year like people talk about surviving the GFC or the telecoms crash.
Yeah.
That there is something unifying in disruption, and it does bring people together. That might be a bit rose-tinted goggle for some people on the call, but I think that will play out, that we will form bonds and learn more about each other this year than we would in a normal year. That being said, though, the pressure of it, the fear, the uncertainty, the people that have been impacted, from a mental or emotional well-being point of view, that all takes its toll as well. So as you say, we've got to get the balance right between embracing what we have done, but also making sure that we're caring for people and nurturing this culture so that we don't end up with completely different organisations after this as well.
So do you think if we just flip it for a minute, and I know we were talking about, Jeff onboarding over 60 people, and in fact, Alex Goody, who's joining us from the UK, mm-hmm. makes the comments that they've also, who runs a business in onboarded a lot of people, but he might struggle if he was one. So how do you think the experience as a candidate joining an organisation has been, and what's your observations around the onboarding process and what may or may not have worked?
I think there's in a face-to-face world, when you're onboarded, there's a lot of things that you see that just give you a read of the place.
Yeah,
like it's almost the unstated way of working. Like it's not in a PowerPoint presentation, it's not in onboarding training, but you just sense a feeling of by walking into an office, where people are, the energy in the room. There's a lot of signals that we take from that as a new person when we join. I think when when we don't have that signals, yes, there's things that you can send people things in the post and you can introduce them in team meetings, but you don't get the team dynamic. The individual relationships might form, but that team dynamic isn't as obvious, I think, in this world that we're in at the moment.
So let's talk a bit about obstacles. And I know this is the big thing that with companies and people you work with around removing some of the obstacles. Can you talk to us a bit around that, and what do we need? How do we clear the decks, really?
Yeah, so I think where do you start an obstacles this year? I think there is just about every single thing that you say we can't do has been laid out before us. Like if this was a military obstacle course, it would disappear off in the distance, the amount of obstacles we've had to get over. We can't get together, we can't see each other, we can't go to the office, we can't go to the shops. There's been a lot of can'ts, right? So we've almost been pushed all the way back into trying to figure out what we actually can do. I think, so that's the practical side of things. There's a lot of things that we just physically haven't been able to do. Mentally, I think there's been a lot of obstacles that have shown up in terms of fear and resistance. So we know that we need to change, but we're kind of resisting that change as well. And that the uncertainty that comes with that. And I'm a firm believer that uncertainty is a response, right? It's not, we don't wake up going, I'm feeling uncertain today. It's a response to something else that's going on. And the key is for us to understand what that obstacle is that's created that uncertainty, whether it's, we need to make more money, or we need to engage our team, or we need to figure out a different way of working with our customers. There's been lots of obstacles for us to overcome that have triggered that uncertainty. But I think the biggest obstacle we need to get over is how do we respond to that? How do we respond to that uncertainty and not stick our head in the sand?
Absolutely. I know I've also found in terms of removing obstacles, it's easier said than done, but try and put yourself in that other person's shoes, because, we're all fighting our own battles, and you don't typically know what that person's got on their plate at a certain point in time. So you don't know what they might be going through, whether it's, the challenge of homeschooling or potential job loss or whatever it might be. Concerns about, COVID. So it's try and be that human empathy, I think, has never been more important.
Yeah, and one of my favourite reframes, I've used this a lot this year, I actually talk about it in Unite, is to remind ourselves that we are not uncertain the situation is. Like, we haven't suddenly lost a whole bunch of our expertise because of COVID. We haven't suddenly stopped having these amazing relationships that we had before COVID, right? So we haven't, while the world has changed and the world is uncertain, it doesn't mean that we have to be, and that we can actually take a lot of strength in holding on to what we know and go, okay, this is what I know. What can I do with it to overcome some of these obstacles?
Absolutely. And if you look at the world of talent and projects, the chronic skill shortage hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
It's just been pressed, the pause button's been pressed. But I agree with that. You sort of breathe, and the world, as I say in yoga, just keep breathing. And you know what? The world's not ended. It's been a real challenge, but, humans are resilient. And this leads us on to an opportunity to answer the first question that's coming from Jeff. So if there's one habit or lesson that you'll take out of 2020 and into the future, or even a couple, because it's maybe hard to pick out one single thing,
yeah,
what would be your key takeout or two?
I think the biggest one is, when I look at last couple of years, there's a lot of habits that I had that actually don't matter. Like, there were so many things, when I look at my 40, 50 hours a week running my business, things about working and managing home life personally, there was a whole lot of noise in there that just does not matter as much as I thought it was. So I've been very conscious in, what do I actually start to pick up now that Melbourne's starting to open, and being quite intentional about what this new life, or this post-COVID life, is going to look like.
So we're going to talk a bit around, increasing teamwork, and I know we've covered some of this, but Lee Cootie wonders, are there any specific activities that you would advocate to increase teamwork and relationship development with remote working?
So I think the first thing to do is to to recognise that everyone in your team will have responded to what's happened to this year differently.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of conversations with leaders where even their most high-performing people have really struggled this year in a way that they weren't necessarily expecting. And then there's other people in the team that have really stood up and shone and sort of come out of nowhere almost, and have really excelled this year. So I think the first thing to do as a leader is to yes, look at your team as a whole, but also look at them individually, how they responded and what do they respond to. I've got there's 5 or 6 types of people that I normally talk about. Like, some people love to seek out solutions. They love dreaming up and coming up with quite creative ways of working and doing things. Those people need stimulation. So how do you bring that out and work with them in a way that, even though they might still be at home, how do you help stimulate and get that idea generation going? And then there's other people that are the realists and the critics that you sort of go, well, it's fine to say we're going to be working from home forever, but reality is, it's going to be shit. I feel disengaged. So those groups of people, the critics, can actually suck a lot of energy out of the leader, but also the team. So what can you do to overcome their resistance and task them with something that gets them on board as well? And then there's a whole lot of people that I think are the controllers and the champions. So the people that will just keep going no matter what happens, whether they're doing it at home or in an office. They're the people that will just consistently show up. And it's easy to forget those people because they're just there beavering away. You've got to support them and make sure that they keep going as well.
And if you look at, employment tenure and, churn rates of between 10 and 20% typically. So by January, we're going to have, say, 15%, pick the middle point, 15% of the workforce who have never met their colleagues. So are there any advice and tips? I know we've been through some of this, but if you've started a job or you've employed people, are there any things that you would suggest people would do to seek out peers, other parts of the business, to build those relationships in a virtually authentic way?
Yeah, I think that. So I'll do both. So I'll do if you've started in a new role, all of the things that you would normally think about, figure out a way of replicating them. And I don't just mean, well, let's have a Zoom coffee catch up. That's a simple answer. Meeting someone halfway between their house and yours, we can do that. We can do that now. Why don't you go for a walk around the park? Call someone up and ask them to tell them about themselves and what they do. Not every conversation that we have needs to be about work. We find out incidentally, all that incidental conversation, the stuff that helps us understand that, whether someone's married or not, or they've got a partner or kids, or, where they've lived, getting people to share stories, do intros. That sort of conversation doesn't come out automatically in meetings. And also, you show up at an organisation with a whole lot of experience. So what can you do to actually share some of that with them? And introduce why you made it into the team as a candidate. I think it's important. I think for a leader with a new team member, I think it's important to remember they're probably just going to need that little bit of tender loving care that you would normally give them in your face to face. You just need to replicate that as well, and just being a little bit more conscious of checking in with them, meeting them if you can, and understanding importantly what's going on at their home life. I think if anything else, leaders have had more insights about what people actually have going on at home this year than they've probably had in any other year as well.
Yeah, we've all had a window into each other's lives, probably more so than ever before, haven't we? Gary Winkle wonders, do you have any tips on narrowing your focus and doing a great job of the really important things rather than spreading yourself too thin and just getting stuff done and, being busy for busy's sake, really?
Yeah, I think there is I'm a big fan of important versus urgent. I mean, that's not my thinking. That's Stephen Covey's. So that's the first question I ask is, yes, it's important. Is what I'm doing urgent or important? Like I'm going away for the next few days with a couple of friends to work on my business. That's important work for me to do right now. Urgent is I need to get a newsletter out. But if it doesn't happen in the next hour, it can happen at 4 o'clock this afternoon. It can happen tomorrow morning. Like, it needs to happen, but it's not as important as other things. So that's the first thing I look at. I think I'm quite a purpose-driven person. Yep. And a lot of the reasons why I did Vid-19 earlier this year was important work to me. I wanted to support people through COVID and to help that many people, particularly in the first lockdown, gave me a lot of energy. So Gary, it's great to hear your question and nice to see you. If you're ever in doubt, ask yourself, does it matter? Because I firmly believe that we default to what matters to us without even thinking. But often we lose sight of that purpose and values, and we end up getting caught up in everything else.
We're pretty much out of time, but I'm interested to see how you think 2021 is shaping up. Anything in particular think we should look out for, and speak a bit about optimism.
Yeah, I think there's a certain part of 2021 where, let's face it, there will be things that have come out of this year that we're still going to have to grapple with. But I think we need to almost, the best we can, and ring fence some of that and say, yeah, here is the things that we've still got to work through. Like, we've still got to work through about how we work together and how many people are in the office. There's a few things in there that we need to answer depending on where you are in the world. But I think beyond that ring fence, there's still a laundry list of things that we want to do as organisations. So I'd be starting to think about how can we do those in this current environment. And it's easy to say, well, we can't do any of them because it's uncertain. But I challenge people to think about that and almost use it as an opportunity to maybe get a bit more creative with some of those options. And because I think if you understand that people are motivated by progress, taking any steps right now in the right direction is going to be better than taking none. And I'm incredibly optimistic about next year. I would hold on to the thing. I'm holding on to the things that are important to me. Yep. I've been inspired by working with my clients differently. Yep. I've got clients in more places in the world this year than I had before. So there's an opportunity for me to work with different people in different ways than I have had before. So I would encourage people to, over the Christmas break, maybe step out the hamster wheel, take some time personally to shape your future that works for you personally and professionally. But then from a work point of view, then, okay, well, what can we start to do? And if things are too gnarly, make them smaller.
I'd encourage everyone to connect with Julia Steele on LinkedIn, and we'll also be obviously sending out Julia's details, doing some amazing work with brilliant people and fantastic businesses. And final polite reminder, we're fundraising for Beyond Blue, doing brilliant work, supporting the community in mental health. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. This is a wrap for season 2. We're planning a great season 3 starting February next year. But I wish you and your families all the best after such an arduous year. And let's keep positive. As I like to say, if you haven't got hope, you haven't got anything. And, onwards and upwards. Ladies and gentlemen, Julia Steele.
Thanks so much, everyone. Wishing you all the best for the end of the year, and here's to a great 2021.